Star Trek Generations was a way to continue the Star Trek film franchise while trying to maximize the bottom line. The original series actors were definitely showing their age, and their salaries went up with every film, so the idea came to start doing movies with the crew of the next generation. Like I said over on All Good Things, TNG managed to break into popular culture like the original had, so it seemed like a good plan. Beloved characters that could have adventures and who didn't demand the high salaries. So let's take a look at this first outing. Before we begin, I have to lay out one caveat. Unlike most of the material we cover, this film has been commented on a great deal by others. I've made the conscious decision to not find out what those others have said. This is not my doctoral thesis in dork studies where I'll be assembling a cited reference sheet to indicate where I have built upon the works of others or tried to avoid repetition. To hell with that. That's starting to sound like a real job, and I've already outsourced most of my work to India to avoid that kind of thing. So this week, you get what you always get, which is an opinionated look at a Star Trek work. It's just that other people have been doing the same thing. Maybe theirs is better, but I can at least take comfort in knowing that while I may suck, I make up for it by being horribly lazy. Star Trek Generations hangs out near the bottom of the list of Trek movies, and with good reason. It's a mess. But the most glaringly obvious misstep is the death of Kirk. Not the fact they wanted to kill Kirk, that's fine. In fact, I'd argue that would have made a damn fine movie. That's not what this film is, though. It's not the death of Kirk. It's the film where, oh, by the way, Kirk dies. Scientists have determined that if you watch The Wrath of Khan and this back-to-back, the weighty theme of death culminating in Spock's death versus the vacuous nature of Kirk's here, that you are in serious danger of getting the bends and should seek out the nearest decompression chamber. Hopefully one with a punching bag in it. Star Trek 7, Here's Some Stuff, shows what happens when their reaching for coolness doesn't yield to, maybe I should actually be about something. There's an overall plot here, sure, but it's already silly, and it's surrounded by other stuff that seems like someone went over to a fanfic site and just started grabbing things to make the movie. Worf gets promoted, and remember that emotion chip? That's totally going in. And Kirk meets Picard, and they ride around on horses together, and then there's those Klingons with the big tits, and we finally see the Enterprise B. This movie is so awesome! And then when they go to fight Soren and his evil Klingon forces, Data says, freedom is the right of all sentient beings, and transforms into a motorcycle, and then Worf hops on his back and rides off to slice them all with his batleth as they ride into Mordor. Now that being said, there's some things people have commented on that I'm not going to gripe about. For instance, the minor prop changes, or the new lighting, or any of the other things that don't make the transition from TV show to feature movie. I know I'm expected to stand for consistency with the fans, but like I've said before, the only consistency I care about is consistency to things the show itself has previously made a big deal out of. Like not beaming through the shields. If you beam through the shields, that's irksome, not because it's a contradiction, but because not doing it has been relevant about as many times as the fact that Geordi is blind is relevant. And how would it look if somebody just told Geordi to take that stupid visor off so he could see things more clearly? Sure, I may poke a bit of fun at the show for firing a phaser out of the proton torpedo tube, but it's just a goof. We all know that, and it happens. So don't expect anything on the lighting. You've got to rein the fanboy in, or the next thing you know, you're speeding away from Comic-Con with Peter Davison in the trunk of your car. We've covered some of the backstory for this film, but there is so much backstory that covering it all would have delayed things for a long time to come. Not to mention that the backstory has tons of backstory, and so does the backstory of the backstory, and I've read that if you are going to discuss any of this kind of thing, you should never do it for more than a minute without losing the audience. And I don't see how we can do that without... Well, no, we can't do... No. No. Fine. Kirk and his Enterprise left the show, so Enterprise D could boldly go, and Picard told them to make it so, but shit, we are just one blow. Data met his evil twin named Lore, and he and West beamed Lore overboard. Then Guinan joined up Picard's accord. Sir people were scattered by the Borg. Duras was a traitor in their midst, and the Klingon people were real pissed, and the Duras sisters brought their tis, and Worf, you get the gist. Borg attacks Lore, did you all see? And Picard goes sees his family, and we get his usual homily. Don't forget, temporal anomaly. The Enterprise C has never been, so it's a war with Klingons and with men. And Yar takes back where it began, has an evil daughter Romulan. Data runs amok and swipes the ship to his father to get a special chip. The Lore shows up and it's equipped in the wrong turn, who gives them the slip. And the Klingons start a civil war, and evil Yar is at the fore. The Prime Directive can't ignore, but Worf gets Picard like before. Ferengi scientist defies cliche, makes shield to fly in the sun all day. Used to keep the Borg at bay, so Data gets a chip away. Let us never speak of the montage again. Generations opens with what might be considered a fitting metaphor for this film, a bottle of booze flying through space. I know it's a vain hope, but maybe I can drink my way out of this movie. Anyway, like the viewer's hopes, the bottle is dashed within the first few minutes. They're christening the Enterprise B, with Cameron in the captain's chair, and Kirk, Scotty, and Chekhov showing up to... I guess they have nothing better to do. Kirk's surprised to discover Sulu's daughter at the helm, wondering how the hell he managed to raise a child and be captain without having her build apocalyptic devices or get killed by the Klingons. As Shatner's swan song for the role of Kirk, it's a shame to see his role so obviously and shamefully for exploitation rather than as a real contribution to the story. All of this, after all, is to provide the villain's backstory and to eventually justify his meeting with Picard. That's the reason we have Chekhov and Scotty here, as Nimoy and Kelly felt no need to appear in a glorified cameo. And of course they'd have to be confined to the Enterprise B scenes, since it's not as if they're alive in the TNG era and could have met the Enterprise D crew. The sad part is that the film was supposed to open with Kirk coming in from an orbital dive and landing in a field next to Scotty and Chekhov. It would have given Kirk a last great image of being larger than life, rather than, well, let's face it, his heavy-set jogs that always looked like he was afraid he wasn't going to get the last donut. The stuff is on the deleted scenes, and you can see why they went with the alternative given the footage. But it is pretty pathetic. I mean, how can it not be completely embarrassing that between one of the most iconic leading men in science fiction leaping from a ship in orbit and dropping into the atmosphere of Earth and surviving it all, and a spinning bottle of champagne, champagne proves the more interesting. So Cameron announces that they're running around the solar system for their little shakedown cruise, when, lo and behold, there's a distress signal from a ship carrying Elorian refugees 3 light years away. Cameron knows they're not equipped for a rescue mission, but as usual, they're the only ship in range. Unusually, though, they're the only ones in range within the solar system, where Starfleet is. Wow, hard to look at those fears of mothballing the Starfleet in Star Trek VI as being paranoia when you see all this. It must be asked, in all seriousness, whether Earth can more likely survive an alien attack with the intervention of Starfleet or Shia LaBeouf. I mean, Battler of Giant Robots and Indiana Jones' Bastard Child versus a group that has only one ship with missing pieces? Hell, put that way, Starfleet seems to have fallen about 97 on that list, long past Unit, the Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum team, Sinclair by himself, and hell, Mel Gibson with nothing more than boards, nails, and a baseball bat probably would do better repelling aliens. Though that's questionable, as I believe he just took his existing plan and just substituted in alien wherever it said Jew. So we find what is a massive glowing energy ribbon, and sure enough, the 2 transports somehow failed to avoid something both gigantic and leaving a bright glowing trail. With no tractor beam, they've got to try to technobabble them out, but there's counter-technobabble blocking the way.
Venting plasma from the warp nacelles that might disrupt the ribbon's hold on the ships.
Aye, sir.
Should I get President Palmer to the escape pod, Captain? When one of the ships blows up, Cameron knows that turning back the odometer isn't going to cut it this time, so he asks Kurt to bail him out. This is also the point where doing the find and replace of Chekhov and Scotty for McCoy and Spock shows itself. Kirk orders them to head in and beam over the survivors, who go directly to sickbay. Chekhov demonstrates his medical expertise by pointing out that it'd be a good idea if they had a doctor and some nurses to deal with the sick people.
They detail now. You just become nurses. Let's go.
The only time Chekhov's ever said that line was to 2 hookers on Ryza.
Sir, I'm having trouble locking onto them.
And something's wrong with my ears. Scotty manages to beam over some of them, including Guinan and Sarin. The medical help is mostly just standing there and telling everyone not to panic, and a good liberal dose of the off-button hypospray. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is trapped and risking destruction itself.
I do have a theory. I thought you might.
Well, that makes one of us, Kirk. I know Scotty's a hell of an improvisational engineer, but outside that, most of his theories are usually found halfway down a bottle. In order to pull this plan off, someone needs to head down to the deflector control and technobabble the way out, and while Kirk briefly takes the command chair, he instead takes the job himself, quickly saving the day so the ship can turn around. The Nexus is bitter, however, and so blasts the part of the ship pointing away from it just so it can get its revenge on Kirk. As Scotty, Chekhov, and Cameron take in Kirk's sacrifice, we transition to the next generation.